Welcome to the GovComms podcast, bringing you the latest insights and innovations from experts and thought leaders around the globe in government communication. Now, here is your host, David Pembroke.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to GovComms, the podcast that examines the practice of content communication in government and the public sector. My name's David Pembroke. Thank you for joining me. Today, we talk about one of my current obsessions, which is about design and the importance of design, not only in the design of services and programs, but visual design and identity, and where design is now playing such a critical part in our communications, and why we have to be so respectful of design as we think about, as I say, not just the design of programs and services and products and other things, but identity. It is such a visual world that we now live in, and we have to bring design practice into the heart of what we do as government communicators. But my guest today is Dan Formosa, who is a consultant in design and design research. He works with creative teams to develop products and services in a wide range of categories. His background is in product design, and he has a master's and a Ph.D. in ergonomics and biomechanics. Dan based his career on the idea that design should focus on people, not things. Now, there's a lesson for us all, focusing on people, not things. His work has received numerous design awards, and he's been selected for national and international exhibits. Back in 1997, he was invited to work with the Elliott Noise Studio. Dan was a junior member of the design team that helped IBM to conceive how a computer could possibly fit into a home. From 81 to 90, he worked with Smart Design, a company he established. His work on OXO Good Grips kitchen tools became a symbol of product design to work for everyone. The interface he created for XM Sirius established the standard for satellite radio in the US. Dan played a key role in conceiving a thing called Smart Gauge, which was an instrument cluster for Ford, and it was designed to influence driving behaviour and save fuel. It was an innovation for the auto industry at the time. In healthcare, he has rethought products ranging from everyday consumer health items to surgical equipment. In addition, his design work helped create the Masters in Branding program at the School of Visual Arts in New York City. He lectures around the world and writes frequently about design method and the physical and emotional aspects of design and innovation. In addition to consulting, he's co-founded the 4B Collective, which focuses on design and gender. Dan has also co-authored and illustrated the best-selling book, The Baseball Field Guide, implying principles of information design to explain the intricate rules of Major League Baseball. He joins me from his home a few short miles north of Manhattan. Dan Formosa, thanks very much for joining me on GovComms.
Thanks, David. Happy to be here.
Design. Where does it take me back to your journey into design? So obviously there is the professional application, but when did you start sort of thinking about design and the importance of design in the way we live and the way we work and the way we communicate?
Well, I've probably got some childhood stories where I have noticed some odd things in the world. So it probably dates way back. But when I was in high school, I was tossed a little bit between getting into engineering or getting into art. And that sounds like two diverse topics, but I was into both. And at the very last minute, a teacher suggested that I look at product design, industrial design. And I did. I had never heard of it before, but I looked into some industrial design schools, applied, pulled a portfolio together, and got in.
What did you learn in that, that first foray into industrial design? What are some of the things that you learned back then that are the principles and laid the foundation for your future work?
Well, very interesting. The history of industrial design really did focus on the thing. On the object and on manufacturing processes and a lot of technical aspects. When I was just emerging from design school, and actually all through college and design school, I tended to focus more on how products related to the body. How does the hand work, and how does your body work when you sit or stand up or when you hold something? And I was a little more into it, I would say, into the body mechanics and the effect of products and design on people and the environment, probably a little bit more than most, definitely more than was being taught in the school programs at the time. So I was a little bit of an oddball on focusing on people early on.
And how do you get the best out of observation, and how do you become good at picking up cues that are important? Because a lot of what we're talking about in terms of GovComms is the importance of understanding people, being empathetic. But obviously, people can tell you one thing, but obviously observation is another critically important, obviously in design itself, but observation really can give you the truth, the real insight. So how did you learn to be an intelligent observer and a sympathetic and an empathetic observer?
Well, one thing I would emphasize is that there seems to be a tendency for either design groups or marketing groups or engineering groups to look at a group of people and average them and say, this is generally what people do. And I have always avoided that. I never thought about the average, always thought about the spectrum. And when you think about the spectrum, you need to think about the tallest person and the shortest person, the fastest and the slowest. You need to look at individuals, not homogenize them as if they are one homogeneous group. So that may sound obvious, but it's not that widely practiced. There was always a tendency, especially when I was just coming out of design school, to average people and say, this is our average consumer, this is our average person. And I'd come back, and a lot of work goes into averaging those people. And I'd come back and say, well, I don't care about the average person. What I want to know is the spectrum. And I want to know especially the people at the edges.
And why the people at the edges? Why are they of particular interest to you?
Well, you'll find a lot of challenges at the edges, and you'll find that it's really fertile ground for innovating and understanding real problems. Whether you're talking to a novice or an expert, they both have things to tell, and if you're observing them, there are things to see when you watch a novice and an expert. The people in the middle, fine, but if you understand the edges, then you're kind of covered for the people in the middle. What you want to do as well is, if you want to include as many people as possible, of course, you've got to look at the edges. Ability or disability or inclusion or exclusion is really defined in many cases by design, and it's really defined by designing for those edges. So designers, architects, graphic designers have a lot of power in actually enabling or disabling people.
In terms of, though, assembling the data around the spectrum, obviously the averaging helps to simplify and makes it a lot easier to develop a persona or a archetype of some sort that perhaps makes the communicator or the designer's work a little bit easier. But what you're suggesting is the averaging really takes out a lot of the real insight and the real value, because what you're actually doing is, mashing things together that shouldn't be mashed together. And is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, totally against any form of simplification. The world is complex, and what you really need to do is embrace that complexity. Unfortunately, there's a tendency to make things as simple as possible. And I just don't think that's healthy. That's not the way we're going to understand the world.
But in terms of that, though, that makes it harder, doesn't it? Because what it does is, again, going back to your analogy around the spectrum, all of a sudden I have to examine a range of different segments across that spectrum for me to be able to understand the complexity. So is that where machine learning and artificial intelligence is going to start to create some real value because it's going to be able to synthesize the data from those various segments and hopefully pull the insights a bit faster than it would if you had to do it just by traditional methods?
Yeah, it certainly can. I mean, we're doing it now by just saying complex is okay. Complex is actually what we want. I encourage people, designers, to write things down on a giant blackboard, not on PowerPoint or Keynote, where you just see one slide at a time, because you really don't get a picture of the world by looking at one slide at a time. I really say let's map out, let's visualize the complexity, let's look at relationships, let's look at dependencies, and really let's revel in that complexity, because we're going to see things, we're going to see patterns that we wouldn't otherwise see, and it's going to spark ideas that we would not otherwise have. So yeah, I'm all about embracing the complexity and actually living in it, because that's the world. That's reality. That's the world. And it really does spark a lot of ideas.
Okay, so with that, what's some of your advice in terms of, just say people are able to try to, join up, various stakeholders and various contextual variables which are impacting on this complexity, and they're able to map it in some form. What's some process that you suggestion around that as to how people can manage that complexity and manage through the complexity to try to land on the insight that is valuable? How best should people go about that? And do you have any advice about how people should go about those discussions?
Yeah, a very early form of advice is to make sure everyone realizes that questions are okay. A lot of times when you start a project or you're trying to come to a solution, there's a tendency for people to jump to an answer. Like, I've got it. Here's the idea. Here's my idea. Here's your idea. Here's my idea. What I really encourage is lots and lots and lots of questions. Because if you're going to innovate, you really have to start by asking questions. I will say, too, that at least the school system in the U.S. and maybe everywhere, we have been a bit brainwashed against asking questions. We're not that good at it. We're very shy about asking questions. We don't want to be the dumb person in the room, or we don't want to be the troublemaker. So I would encourage everyone to be that troublemaker or to ask those questions and ask why, not answer what.
And in terms of that, though, so if you're running a session and you're getting people moving through the why and not forcing people to actually, obviously early in the process, it's not about a solution, because at this we don't know yet, but we explore the why. But once we get through that, and we have been curious and we've we've been humble enough to be able to expose ourselves to really, expose as many questions as we possibly can. Then what do we do once we've got once we've got it all out and we've sort of know the spectrum of the challenge? How then do we move through that to the next stage?
I always like to think in terms of hypotheses and really basic scientific method, which is something that you probably learn in grade school or, your first science class. But the thought is, make some observations out in the world based on either what you've seen or what you are currently seeing, and then come up with some hypotheses. And then when you have those hypotheses, see if you can prove them or delve into them further. Once you have hypotheses, those hypotheses generate more questions. And really following that method, hopefully that once you start to get creative, you do that just by practice. You just do that automatically. But I find that when I'm talking to design groups, I really need to emphasize that would be a very highly recommended process. Really think about hypotheses and and ask those questions and be very open-minded and think blue sky, especially if you're in a area or category that is really ready for innovation.
Okay, so again, what happens then? So we've been out. So we've mapped the complexity as best as we can. We've then gone out to observe in the real world, to look at these groups, whoever they may be, to see how they're interacting, to see how they're behaving, to see how they're reacting, to see how they're behaving. Then we come back and we bring that together and we join it up into those hypotheses. But then we're going down to a further layer of questioning of, now that we've got a little bit more fidelity, a little bit more information, we're now sort of going further into the exploration process. At what point do we sort of stop asking questions and start making decisions about what it is that we've got to do? When do we find that clarity and to have the confidence to have stop the exploration and start the actual design process?
Well, I always have.
Well, sorry, the next step of the design process.
Yeah, I always think it's important for the design team to be conducting that research. As a design team or engineering team is making those observations or conducting those research, or as they're out in the field, those ideas are starting to flow. So they really start to germinate very early during that research phase. So it really is not a very specific cutoff point, like now the research is over, now we're going to start to come up with some ideas. It really does evolve as that research is taking place. So I will say also that if you're looking for, just one thing to mention that needs to happen in parallel, if you are looking for some innovative solutions, or if you are heading for some innovative solutions, you also have to make sure that the company or the corporation or the organization or that you're working for or that you're doing this for is ready for that sort of innovation. Because very often the companies or organizations can be their own worst enemy when it comes to accepting innovative ideas. So I would say a couple of things need to happen in parallel.
Okay, but in terms of making an assessment as to whether an organisation is ready or not ready, what are some of the key signals that you must have before you set out on this process? Is it endorsement from senior leadership? Is it from enthusiasm from your team? Is it your immediate supervisor? What are those signals that people should be looking for to judge whether or not an organisation is, as we say in Australia, fair income, about embracing new ideas and innovation?
Well, it helps to take a lot of the key people along for the ride. So involve them or keep them posted. Don't finish the research and then say, ta-da, here's what we found out. Keep them informed throughout. Let them know this is an innovation process. And also make sure that the means of evaluating ideas are really geared towards innovative ideas, not for incremental changes. So very often there are what we'll call gates inside a company or organization where they need to now evaluate whether they want to invest in this idea, right, in this project. And very often those methods of evaluation are not geared, they tend to be looking out the back window. They're not necessarily geared for forward-thinking ideas.
So you're suggesting then, though, that those gates and that evaluation has to be done up front, that that we are going to look at this particular process through the lens of as you say, the front windscreen as opposed to the back windscreen, and we're going to do some sort of design around an evaluation process that is going to be forward-looking.
Yeah, think about some of the most innovative ideas that we've seen in even the last decade or so, like Airbnb or driverless cars. Or look at smartphones. Look, I have a phone now with no buttons. What do you think? Not really popular ideas when you first hear them. So they really need to be played out, prototyped, proven out. It really is this, innovation isn't easy, which is why it doesn't happen very often. But the payoff is certainly worthwhile. And if you're going to innovate, you have to stick with it. You have to have some confidence. You have to be prepared to be uncomfortable. As a matter of fact, an entire organization may have to prepare to be uncomfortable. It's not an easy thing to do.
But again,
I mean, the innovation is the innovation itself may be the easiest part of it.
yeah. No, indeed. And what's your advice then around those cultural elements, and how can you be a genuine innovation champion? Obviously, part of your advice is making sure that you have senior leadership and you don't just sell them the idea to start with and then turn up a little bit later and say, oh, by the way, here it is. So engaging and keeping informed and keeping the enthusiasm at that leadership level, perhaps even engaging them to give their views around what might happen so they feel as a participant. But what other ways, as you say, like it's a difficult, time-consuming process, and so maintaining momentum is obviously a key thing. How else might we do that as we move through an innovative process?
Well, one way to do it is to plan for small successes. Everyone likes success. So look at the path of least resistance. Look for places where maybe you can slip something under the radar scope and get it approved or get it done, or at least get it prototyped. Do some testing, do some, proof of concept. And just think about those, maybe I'll call them baby steps. Look for places where you can succeed, even if you succeed small, because, boy, people will just start to latch on any form of success and gain more confidence, and maybe you'll be able to slip yourself in a little more easily, slip those innovative ideas in a little more easily.
And do you suggest that with those small wins that you should be broadcasting those far and wide to say, look, we've started and we're already seeing results, and trying to build that momentum through that, collective effort, that this isn't just the innovation team as such. This notion that innovation really should belong to an organisation, and that everyone should feel like they're part of the innovation team, not just the central core, design innovation team.
Yeah, good point. It sounds like you've done this before. Make it sound like it's everyone else's idea. Yeah.
It works
Make
well.
sure everyone
I've seen that work. I've seen that work so well. I also love the technique of where you have the idea and you know where you want to, but you move into a room, you have a conversation, and then all of a sudden someone has the idea that you're holding in your head, and you can give them ownership of it. It's I've seen people do that very cleverly over the years.
Yeah, it's an art form to actually plant those ideas in someone else's head. It's sort of covert activities.
Yeah. I think in the military they call it psyops.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it works.
It does. Now, listen, you've developed the Masters in Branding program at the School of Visual Arts in New York City. Take me through that. And what are the various elements in that particular Masters program that you're trying to teach people?
It's interesting. We're in our 10th year, which is kind of surprising to me that, 10 years has gone by. But when we started 10 years ago, it was the first time you can get a master's degree in branding. And I was strangely invited to help be part of the founding faculty, because I gave a talk once to a group of branding people at a conference. And part of my talk was pointing out the fact that branding is dead. And what I meant by that, and it didn't get the best review when I first said it, but I did what we just said. I kind of made them think it's their idea, But the reason branding's dead is because, at the time, it's not what it used to be. Companies and organizations used to be in charge of the media, and they could tell you anything they want. But now we are in charge of the media. So the brand is not what a company or organization says it is. It's what we say it is. So when you want to buy a product, for instance, you don't go to the company's website. You go to reviews or the Food Channel or blogs or influencers. So branding is really out of the hands of companies, and it's really in the hands of the people who are using or taking advantage of those services. And as a result, you really do need to be people-centric. it's required. It's a minimum requirement.
And so was that then, as you say, you were a founding member of the faculty and the design of this particular program. So was that the idea that all of a sudden, hang on, let's accept that that's the reality, that technology has now created this new reality, and people have enthusiastically adopted that. So we now have to rethink the process because we're no longer in control.
Yes, and I'm coming in it from left field with the thought, with a design background. I make the point that the product or the service is the brand. Now, the program is not a design program at all. It's really more like a master's. It's more like an MBA focused on brands. So the courses include the history of brands, the psychology of brands, business of brands, etc. A lot of very interesting topics. It's not a design course. You don't need to be a designer to enter it. There's really no design going on within the course as you would think. But the students who come out of it, it's like a revelation. It's a very intense program. It goes on for a year. And we may brand and focus on companies or products or things that are typical, but we also spend a lot of time looking at things like movements, like the Me Too movement or Black Lives Matter. That also, those are also entities, right? And they qualify, at least in our description, they qualify as brands. This year, the thesis is coming up on the 20th. Actually, it's going to be online this time. Because we can't do it live in a theater like we normally do, but it's going to be broadcast, and we're focused on the pandemic. What do we do now?
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good to know. I'll be very interested to publicise that actually to our audience. I'm sure they'll be fascinated to see those insights. So, just about that, and looking at the movements like Me Too, like Black Lives Matter. When you look at those through the lens of design, what do you see? And what can we learn from that in terms of communication? When you look at, as I say, those movements, lens of a design, what are the insights that you take away that can then be applied more broadly?
Well, it needs to be a very strong message. Very often, it's a bottom-up message when we're talking about movements. And it really takes understanding what the needs and the wants and desires of people are and positioning those movements appropriately. Now, sometimes it's not a organized movement in the way that you think a company or a service would be organized. Of course, they don't have a big building where they start a movement like that with people in different offices. But it does help to understand needs and desires of people and be very people-focused and to have a ton of empathy for the people who you're hoping will join that movement.
And it's interesting, isn't it? And where does technology play now? And when I talk about technology, I mean really this, and you sort of suggested it before around this, the democratization of the factors of media production and distribution, and the fact that every individual is essentially potentially a media company. They can create, they can curate, they can distribute, video content, audio content, photography. They can write blog, this is the massive change, obviously, in the way people behave and obviously the way that we engage with them. How does that work into what you're, teaching people about in terms of branding?
Well, everyone is broadcasting, right? Like you're saying, everyone is broadcasting. And what's interesting about the media that we're now consuming is that it is very focused. It's very filtered. Right? What we read is really based on what we want to read. So that's a little bit problematic. We don't always get, or people don't always get the full spectrum of thoughts or ideas or viewpoints. I will say, too, it's interesting how much news is conveyed through the internet or through social media. It's interesting that all my friends on Facebook who used to be experts in politics suddenly became experts in the virus. Not sure how they all made that transition, but they seem to have made that transition pretty smoothly. But I get a lot of news, not just from what people say, but I see a lot of people post things, post articles, and post videos, and post a lot of news. And I actually think it is directed at me in a way because it is being filtered, or maybe I am controlling that filter so that I get to see the things that are more important to me.
But I think what she's then suggesting, though, looking at through the lens of a communication, someone who wants to tell a story about a particular policy or a program or a service or a regulation. But I think what you're suggesting there is that you do have to create that content, and you do have to be consistent, and you do have to get it out into the world, and you do have to spread it far and wide if indeed you want people to understand. But when you're creating that content, it needs to be informed by the needs and wants and desires of those audiences that you're seeking to engage with.
Yeah, exactly. And fortunately, or probably unfortunately, there seems to be no shortage of topics to rally around. So, there are plenty of movements to join, or at least to agree with.
So listen, just finally, I just want to ask you about accessibility, and we did touch on it a little bit earlier. That this notion of the spectrum, and making sure that we are, paying attention to the edges, so as that we make sure that we're not leaving people out. And obviously it's been a key, at the forefront of a lot of your branding and research and innovation work. How then do you think people can best incorporate that accessibility and that awareness around accessibility into the decisions that they make?
It's interesting. I'm finding that not a lot of people think about design. I was invited last year by Epicurious, which is an online magazine, food-based magazine. And they have a series of videos on YouTube. And they asked me if I would come in and critique some kitchen gadgets. And it was all very improvised and all very, they found gadgets and they kind of sprung them on me. And we had a camera crew in a studio. And at this point, we've made 8 videos and we have more than 15 million views. In those videos, I critique these very odd kitchen gadgets that they find, like these things that slice watermelons or, peel onions. Or so maybe, they spring these very odd things on me. And what I talk about, well, first I try them, then I critique them, then I come up instantaneously with ideas on how to make them better. And as I do that, I say, well, this needs to be accessible. People have slippery hands. People have weak hands. Lots of people have arthritis. Lots of people need to use their left hand and their right hand at the same time. Maybe they're not as coordinated. So I point out not just, design flaws or maybe areas for design improvement, but I talk about accessibility, designing for the spectrum. And from the comments that I've seen, I don't read them all, but from the comments I've seen, people don't think about it, or maybe it's a revelation when I start talking about designing for the spectrum and thinking about everyone. So I get a lot of positive feedback. And, like I said, a crazy number of views on those YouTube videos. Yeah.
But again, it's such a simple concept, though, isn't it? Where you're obviously taking you're patient with your exploration and then thinking, okay, well, as you say, weak hands, sweaty hands, strong hands, small hands, big hands. Everybody is in the kitchen using this device, and so it's how do you bring everybody into it and then work backwards from those insights. So, but actually, it doesn't surprise me that that's quite popular. Because they can probably see themselves, Someone probably goes, hey, no one, I've got arthritis and no one ever talks about, no one ever gives, no one ever puts me into the picture. And, when Dan looks at it, he's bringing everybody along for the ride. And accessibility is not just about people with a disability as such. It's really a much broad, it's looking at people in a different way.
Yeah, as part of those videos, I do this trick that I sometimes do when designing products is I'm right-handed. So I use my left hand to use the product and oil it up. soak it in oil, a soap, make it super slippery. And if I could use this product with my left hand soaked in oil, it probably works, right? And the shape is fine, right? The shape is fine. The actions and the movements are fine. If it doesn't work, it really quickly highlights where things can be improved, and it's kind of become a sort of a theme throughout these Epicurus videos where I'm just doing the left-handed oil test with basically everything I'm trying. And, I guess it's entertaining because people are watching it and commenting on it. And you also get a lot of strange and very odd sexual comments, which I won't go into, but it is, people are watching it. But it is about accessibility. It is about challenging yourself. It is about putting, trying at the very most in putting yourself in other people's places. Now, in reality, we would, I would find people who have dexterity problems or hand problems and actually talk to them. But as a very quick challenge to yourself, it helps to just challenge yourself and try it firsthand.
Yeah. And I think probably what I'm again, one of the key things I'm taking from this discussion really is that importance to not rush. That importance not to get to the answer quickly, not to feel like you've got to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing. It's like, well, hang on, if you just take a little bit more time, be a little bit more curious, be a little bit more inclusive, you're likely to design an outcome which is going to be far more useful and in the long run probably a more efficient way to the right outcome, as opposed to that, with this hard driving, got to go. We've got to, we're on the clock, so to speak. So, that's interesting. That's how I feel, actually, as I'm listening to you. I'm sort of feeling like, and this is, often for me, I feel like, okay, just slow down. Give yourself some time, let those ideas sit with you, let it come. It's there, but you've just got to be curious and patient, and understand that, the answer is there, but, it might take a little bit longer to find it.
Yeah, exactly. Trust yourself, use that time wisely, even take some time off in the middle, even if you're under a deadline. I often ask people where they get their best ideas, and it's never in a conference room. It's either in the shower or it's in the car when I'm driving alone.
Yeah.
So, take showers.
We'll do that. Okay, Dan, thank you so much for being so generous with your time today. This is it's a different take on the world that we live in government communication, people who are designing program and policy, but the principles that you've outlined today are the principles that can be applied in that very field. And I think it's directly applicable to, that observation, that deep empathy, that, clear understanding, that inclusiveness, that curiosity. That really sits at the heart of great policy and programs and solutions. So I think the audience will take a lot from it. I've got a couple of pages worth of notes here that I'm actually going to go out and transcribe to put in my little file of stuff I should read more often. And I'll go back and have a look at those Epicurus videos as well. And listen, where might people be able to connect with you to understand a little bit more and stay on the journey with you at the 4B Collective?
Oh, Dan at 4bcollective.com, or simple one is Dan at danformosa.com. Just use my name. I am accessible and findable, I think.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to people connecting with you, and obviously you are a very generous soul, and if people reach out, I'm sure you'd be happy to have a conversation with them. So to Dan Formosa, a few short miles, I think, north of Manhattan. Enjoy, stay safe. I hope your family stays safe in these challenging times, and to you, the audience, for you, please, wherever you are in the world, you stay safe. And thanks very much for coming along once again today. Fantastic conversation there with Dan. Really, what a fantastic insight there for us, and so much to think about as we go back to our work now. The idea of this podcast is to learn and to take things, but you have to apply them, okay? You can't just listen and do nothing with all of that information that Dan's just given you. That's not part of the deal. If you listen to this program and you pick this stuff up, you have to apply it, and then you have to tell us how this is improving the way that you are strengthening strengthening communities and improving the well-being of citizens around the world through effective communication. So thanks to you for coming back once again. Thanks to Dan Formosa, and thanks to everyone. But I'll be back at the same time next week. But for the moment, it's bye for now.
You've been listening to the GovComms podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to rate and subscribe to stay up to date with our latest episodes.